Hello, grade 8s, and welcome to another history lesson about the Renaissance. So today we are going to be talking about Renaissance art. You actually won't have that many notes for your notebook, but that means we're going to be doing a lot of work on this topic in class, but I'm really looking forward to it, and we're going to have some fun with looking at Renaissance art. So today, please write down today's title, which is Renaissance Art. Make sure it's underlined, write today's date, and your learning objective is we're going to explore techniques used by artists during the Renaissance. And as we talked about in our previous lesson, Renaissance art is extremely different from medieval art, and you guys had picked out some very obvious differences, and we're going to go into some more detail today. So please write this in your notebook. I actually have a starter question for you as well. I want you to look at this photograph and tell me, or write down in your notebooks in a full sentence, what does this photograph tell you about people's interest in Renaissance art today? And if you're thinking, I have no idea, well, let me explain what you are looking at. This is a picture taken inside a very famous museum called the Louvre. It has lots of art in Paris. And this, can you see what painting that is? That's the Mona Lisa. So you can see it's very popular. Okay, so please answer this starter question in your notebooks, and we'll hear your answers in the next lesson. All right, let's get started and discuss some of these major changes. So during the Renaissance, wealthy Italian families and church leaders paid artists to create paintings, sculptures, and buildings for display throughout their cities. And you guys already know that. We've talked about that a lot in Florence with the Medicis, Venice as well, and some of the other important Italian city-states. So the Pope himself funded many works of art to decorate the Vatican. Renaissance artists followed the models of the ancient Romans and Greeks, but expressed humanist ideas. So if you compare medieval and Renaissance paintings, you will see major differences in their styles. Renaissance art tries to show people as they would appear in real life. It also tries to show people's emotions. When a medieval artist depicted the birth of Jesus, he wanted to remind Christians about their belief that Jesus was born to save the world. A Renaissance artist painting of the same scene might try to show how tender Mary looked with her tiny baby. And we'll look at some examples in tomorrow's lesson. Renaissance painters also used new techniques. The most important was perspective. And I know you guys had talked about doing perspective with Miss Bex in art before, so you guys know a little bit about that already. So perspective is a method that makes a drawing or painting look three-dimensional. Artists had tried to use perspective before, but Renaissance artists perfected it. Using perspective, objects in a scene appear to be at different distances between the viewer. The result is a much more realistic painting. Okay, so that's the very first technique, and that's very important to note. And so to make their paintings more realistic, Renaissance artists also use a technique called chiaroscuro, right there. And please make sure you have that word underlined or starred or highlighted in your notes. That's going to be an important keyword. It's very difficult to say. Chiaroscuro, soften edges by using light and shadows instead of stiff outlines of separate objects. In Italian, chiaro means clear or light, and oscuro means dark. Chiaroscuro created more drama and emotion in the painting. Okay, and I wanted to show you this as an example. So you can see perspective. Certain objects in this painting seem closer. For example, the man in the chair, or these items on the table. And some objects seem further away in the painting, such as these three men. But also if you look at his arm, it looks like it's reaching out towards us, the viewer. And there we get that idea of this painting being three-dimensional. So it's popping out at us a bit. Again, you can see chiaroscuro because there's a lot of lightness. We can almost see a ray of light coming in. And shadows, we can see lots of darkness. Okay, so those are two techniques that are used during the Renaissance that we can see in this example. All right, let's talk about some of the artists. So the artistic Renaissance lasted from about 1350 to 1550, but really hit its peak in 1490 to 1520. At the time, great artists were producing masterpieces. Three of the most famous artists were Leonardo da Vinci, Raphael Sanzio, and Michelangelo Buonarroti. Although Leonardo also became a great scientist and inventor, which we've already discussed in lessons, he trained as an artist. Born in 1452, he began his training in Florence at a young age. Training in workshops was an old tradition, but during the Renaissance, individual artists began to do something no medieval artists had done. They signed their own work. They put their signature on it. One of Leonardo's most famous works is The Last Supper, which he began painting in 1494 on a wall behind a church altar. He actually painted on wet plaster with watercolor paint. A painting done this way is called a fresco. So please make sure frescoes in your notes, underlined, highlighted. That's a key term. And again, in case you missed that, that's when Leonardo would paint on wet plaster, like on the wall, with watercolor paints. Okay, here is the Last Supper right here. This one has been touched up a little bit. So in this painting, the Last Supper, it shows Jesus right here and his disciples. Leonardo was able to show human emotions through small differences in how each apostle held his head or the apostle's position in relation to Jesus. Leonardo showed his skill again in the Mona Lisa, and we'll talk about that some more in the next lesson. People still argue about what the woman in the portrait is thinking. What is the mystery behind her smile? Let's talk about Raphael a little bit. So although Raphael worked at the same time as Leonardo, he was much younger. Even as a young man, Raphael worked with ease and grace and became known as one of Italy's best painters. Italians especially loved the gentle Madonnas he painted. He also painted many frescoes in the Vatican Palace. Perhaps the best known painting is the School of Athens, which depicts a number of Greek philosophers. And let's take a look at that painting. So here's Raphael's School of Athens, very famous painting or fresco. And again, if you remember, the Renaissance is a rebirth, but it also recalls back to Greek and Roman times. So you can see that this is a scene showing the Greek city-state of Athens and philosophers. Again, philosophy is really important during the Renaissance, and this is a very humanist painting showing all these men discussing, talking, and things like that. Another great Renaissance artist was Michelangelo Buonarroti. Like many artists of the time, Michelangelo painted, sculpted, and designed buildings. He painted one of the best-known Renaissance works, the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Although he painted many outstanding works, Michelangelo was a sculptor at heart. He believed his talents were inspired by God. He carved his statues to show perfect versions of human beings as a symbol of God's beauty and perfection. Michelangelo's best-known sculpture is the 13-foot-tall statue, David. The sculptor made David seem calm yet ready for action. So if you recall the story in the Bible of David and Goliath, that's what the statue is. So let's take a quick look. This is a close-up of the statue of David, so I'm sure you would recognize him. We can look at a full version of it in the next lesson, but you can look closely at David's face and see the hair, the details in the ear, the eyes. You can see the expression, the focus on his face here, and that is what some of Michelangelo's best work is able to show. So those are just 3 artists of the Renaissance. There's many other, and we're going to look at some more art in the next lesson. If you guys have any questions you want to ask, please write those down and we can discuss those tomorrow. All right, guys, that's all for today. I'll see you tomorrow in history.